Good morning and welcome back to the Explicit Measures podcast with Tommy, Seth, and Mike. Good morning, everyone, and welcome back.
Good morning, gentlemen. Happy Tuesday.
Good morning, guys.
Starting off with a couple technical difficulties on our side, so we are now officially live and going again. So we're going to jump in. Our main topic for today is going to be, we're going to kind of just sit back. We've seen Fabric out for now a number of months. We've gone through Build, and we've gone through the Fabric conference, so we've seen some pretty major announcements that come out from Microsoft. I don't think there's going to be any new major announcements in the near term here. All the major news, I think, has happened. Let's stand back and say, how do we feel about Fabric so far? Does this feel production ready? What pieces of it, or if all of it is ready to go after we've hit GA now since November of last year, I believe. So we're well at like 7 months now and kind of flipping along. So kind of can just give a general feel is Fabric ready? Are you ready for real workloads inside Fabric? So that's going to be our main topic today. Before we do that, let's jump into some news. Tommy, anything from the news that you found?
Yeah, so Fabric, again, the blog post, they're going continuing to churn out the blog posts. There is a new Ultimate Data Factory pipeline mind map. And this is really the first version in a comprehensive guide designed to look at the journey of a pipeline. It's a PDF. I'm surprised they didn't use that Azure mind map tool that they have out there, the interactive one, but it's a PDF that basically shows all the features and the areas you may have questions about. It's pretty cool. It looks definitely was made in Visio.
Yes.
No question. So,
yes. Visio is okay. I think there's honestly better tools out there. I mean, you have to use what Microsoft provides to you. The downside of Visio, it's not like an interactive visual you can go like, zoom in, zoom out on. It's just a PDF that comes out of it. But what's kind of in this mind map, Tommy? Like, I'm looking at it here. I'm going through it and trying to figure out what are they doing with this? What's the point of this thing?
So it's really just setting up your first actions and where do you start in a pipeline? It's a very open canvas if you've never used one before. It can be a little intimidating. So it really actually just goes through, okay, if you need to set up some data integration, how to test the workload, how do you set up a pipeline across workspaces? And then it goes through basically what you be your decision tree, so to speak. So it's not bad. The Git integration and basically it's definitely a first version because I don't think there's any links. There are links. So if you actually look at the tree, it says, hey, CDI CD report, Git integration. Okay, now what? Fabric blog, which you can then click on and then go to the relevant article that talks about that feature.
Interesting. I feel like this would be a great opportunity for like a community built something, because I feel like a lot of the routes and channels on this one are interesting, but I feel like there's a lot more. I feel like I would like a lot more subsections on them, because it talks about like, sections here like, Dataflow Gen 2 versus pipelines versus Spark as third party. Like, I think that thread, that line needs a lot more thoughts. Just having a single line that just talks about, use the decision guide. Here's the learn doc. Like, you didn't need let me say it this way. When I have a mind map that only has a lot of single lines or not a lot of derivation in the mind map, it feels like it's not as valuable. It's just like a list of things. Completely. So I do understand it, but I wish there was a bit more pieces to this.
Do you remember I don't know who built that Azure web service, or like basically where is all those diagrams?
I do remember that.
I'm surprised they didn't use that to build this. But
isn't it like
a little crunch
isn't
time?
Like an Azure diagram, something like that? Azure diagram tool or something like that?
Yeah. But probably they were in a little crunch for time to get this out.
I don't know if it's that. The more I look at this, the more the author or whoever built this is kind of like-minded to me, right? Like, there are many times where I would much rather choose a flow like this to just kind of mind map almost. It's not really an explosion of like following different paths of like, here's how you go build an ADF pipeline for this particular use case, right? It's more covering the high level areas that you would be interested in integration or comparison or whatever from the ADF perspective. And like I find myself like I look at this, and this absolutely could just be a technical article, right? Like integration design considerations, and every one of these is a header with the links. This is just a different visual way to look at it. And at first, I kind of had some of the same thoughts that you guys did, which
Yep.
is, yeah. But then the more I think about it, I'm like, oh, actually, I would do this, or something similar as far as like,
Yeah.
how do I get this out and just this is the flow of something, and that's what I kind of like, because there are some breakouts for each part of these, like performance best practices, use Data Factory fact page, learn more about V-order, performance tuning tips will provide useful and accurate advice, and it's a different path, right? So like that could be why this visualization was chosen, as far as just like breaking out some of these subsets instead of just having them like category, subcategory, in this monolithic, blog, which we also have opinions about, right? Because how do you find something? There's a lot of things to it. So like coming at it from that perspective, I kind of like it.
I think, I'll say this very clearly. Like, I think it's a good idea. And I'm not trying to bash the article or idea there, but there needs to be. It's great having one person's perspective on this thing, but I think the power of this stuff comes from like the community of people that can like add more stuff to it. And I don't know how you do this in a good way, but like there's a lot of people that are discussing like CI/CD stuff. So just having a single link to a Fabric blog is good, but there's probably like a lot of other things or considerations that need to be in there as well. We've talked a lot about it on the podcast. There's diagrams that are showing up on the internet now. There's, to your point, Tommy, Azure Diagrams is a great tool that allows you to like build this kind of interactive thing that's easily shareable, and you could embed that into websites. So it does also feel to me to some degree, it would be a great service to people to be able to take this and even modify it or copy it over and build their own things that you're looking at too. Like maybe you tweak it a little bit. So I like the principle. I do like the fact there's a lot of really good points to documentation that supports a lot of these things. There are a couple there are a couple paths on this that don't have links to the end of them. Maybe I'd add some links at the end, make sure everything has a link. Couple tweaks.
It's a working doc though. Like even after
doc,
it,
yes.
it basically says that they're going to be regularly updating. They want your opinions, and
do it in Azure Diagrams. I put the link in the chat window.
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens. Interesting concept, good ideas. Maybe some food for thought as you're trying to build out different data pipelines or connect using VNets, or you're trying to use notebooks or migrate them between workspaces. Like there's some learned documentation that goes along with that as well. So it definitely seems very interesting here. The one thing I can never find that Google never seems to, or Bing or whatever, nothing ever seems to pick up is the roadmap. Every time if I don't know what it is, I need to bookmark the site or something better, because I can never find the stinking roadmap as to where we're going.
The release plan. Yeah,
the release plan. Yeah. I can remember exactly what to type in, and it never brings me to the right page. It's like, here's the release plan from like 2 years ago. I'm like, I don't want that. I want the one right now. Like, how come that's not easy to find? But this has it on there.
You got to go to two roadmaps, because Power BI, I think, is still in the Power Platform one.
Is it all there in Power BI, or is it in both now?
I don't know if they've changed it. I haven't seen an announcement, but it looks like they have some Power BI.
Pursuant to our conversation this morning, I put the link in our internal chat for you fellas.
Yeah, I'll put it out here.
I found it this morning.
Exactly right. All right. Yeah, Alex Power says Power BI is no longer in the Power Platform one, has now moved over to a Fabric one. So I think the Fabric one is just what Power BI will be using moving forward. There it is. See, that's what I need. AKA.ms Fabric release plan. Just a simple little like, perfect, Alex.
Grab it.
Yes.
Bookmark it.
For Fabric release plan, that's all we care about. Just do that one little thing. Excellent. All right, with that, let's go into our main topic today. Let's transition over. So main topic today, we're going to talk about Fabric. Is it ready? And we're going to kind of just take this one from a mailbag. So I think this is a one I'll kick over to Seth.
It is a mailbag. And for anyone who is sending in a mailbag, this is the best intro, the best way to do it. Chris Young from Metro Detroit here. Thank you, Chris. Thank you for stating who you are and where you're from. That's a fantastic way to start the question. My question is a simple one. Is Fabric soup yet? I know it's GA, but do we trust it with production processes yet? My organization has not enabled it to our tenant yet, opting to keep using ADLS and ADF for now for fear of instability. Is this justified? My boss and I are chomping at the bit to start using Fabric, but he's nervous. Help us out, please. So before we go on any further, I had to look up soup yet. I'm like, is this a typo? No, it's not a typo. Is it soup yet means, is it time or is it ready? And apparently this phrase has been around as long as I've been alive, and I've
Never heard it before.
Never heard of it before. So is it ready yet? Is Fabric ready yet?
That's a good question.
Ooh. So
we should change the title instead of mailbag is Fabric soup yet? That should have been the title.
It should have been.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't even know that phrase existed. Honestly,
me neither. Which is why I had to look it up. So now our listeners know that too. Hey, for those of you live, have you guys ever heard of this phrase before? Are we the only ones in Midwestern Wisconsin and Illinois? Well, Tommy, you've been around other places too.
I've never heard soup. No, I don't know if this is like the Jimmy's or Sprinkles kind of argument.
It's definitely Sprinkles or Jimmy's or Sprinkles. I don't know.
Is it a college thing? Maybe like the people who were born in 95 and after?
No, this is like a 1970s, like when Campbell's Soup started packaging ready-made soup kind of stuff. It was this big controversy of what, you can't spend the time to make your own soup at home, you're just going to do this like microwave whatever, and apparently originated from like, is it time, is it ready yet, is it soup?
I guess is it time to eat yet?
I don't know.
Interesting.
Anyway,
now in the era of microwaves,
onto the hook.
We don't care anymore,
Under the hook of the conversation.
Awesome. So let's jump in. So let's maybe do a little bit of timeline here about Fabric and when it was released, right? So Fabric has been out since build of last year, 2023. That's when it was kind of announced. I believe it went to preview very early there. Right after build, I think you could actually play with it, start playing with Fabric specifically there. And it was in preview all the way up until November, I think 2023. Just give me some rough timelines here. November 2023. Then it went GA. It was announced at, I think was it Ignite? As at Ignite, they were announcing I don't remember if it was Ignite. I don't remember the exact event, but they eventually announced, okay, now we're going to go GA with Fabric, and it was going to kind of be built from there. My opinion was anything that goes kind of GA recently from Microsoft sometimes still has some rough edges around the edge of the system. Mm-hmm. And what we've even seen today is, yes, while Fabric is, Alex has got it there. Public went build, and at build it went public, and Ignite it went GA. So that was in 2023. So here we are, 6 months, 7 months down the road now, and we now have Fabric. What has happened? And my initial thought of Fabric was, okay, maybe play with it a little bit when it goes GA. We're getting closer to where things are getting more reliable and consistent, and then give it some time for it to mature. I got to be honest, I was a little bit hesitant at the beginning to figure out what's going to happen with Fabric. I feel right now very confident around a lot of pieces of it. It's not everything in all of Fabric, but there's definitely a lot more of the pieces in Fabric that I feel very comfortable using. Would definitely put production workloads around. And there are parts of Fabric that I think I would still stay away from a little bit. So I'll just kind of maybe leave it there and let you guys have some impressions too.
No, I think that's an excellent introduction to this, because yes, Fabric in general is GA, but we do know that just like with the blog posts, we see the announcements, the monthly updates that basically being 7 pages long. Yep. They're clearly working on a ton. Not saying you shouldn't have to do that with something that's GA, but the big thing is the holistic Fabric is GA. However, there are a bunch of tools and utilities in it that they're still working on. We know things like with Copilot, task flows just came out. Again, maybe that wouldn't be necessarily something we're all using today, but there's still the need to be aware that just because something's out there like the real-time data hub, is it ready to go? And I think that's more than like we're not just Chris, but a lot of organizations and a lot of teams are having hesitation.
Yeah, I equate this to what we lived through originally with Power BI, way early on, right?
Mhm.
Like, because it was unique in that I had only started consulting as a BI consultant, where we were looking for the next thing. How do you engage customers in the Microsoft reporting stack or business intelligence stack at that time? And they didn't have anything to compete with Tableau, right? So
Yeah.
when Power BI came out, we're on it, we're gung ho about it, but was it something that we could implement in every single case? And the answer was no, right?
Yeah.
But why was it no there, right? Like, there were a ton of cases that absolutely like the foundational parts of the platform were there. Could you go head to head with Tableau right out of the gate? Right? Like, there were
Yes.
some improvements in, the reporting interface and how you develop the look and feel of things that just had to come a long way. But foundationally, like automation and bringing people up to a like parity, or trying to automate their processes, was a huge time saver. And I guess to some degree, I look at this question in that same lens, and I think it's important to look at it in not just a yes no, right? Mike, to your point, you're saying there are tons of workloads. There are a bunch of different things that I'm super confident and comfortable in, and I think they're strong, etc. And I think to embrace like the question, or the fear of like, can we cut over? You have to get out of this mindset of we're just full on cutting over, or we're like, especially in his case, where we're migrating from existing platforms into this new one, and we're just gonna bam, it's done. That's where you get in trouble. And it's not just Fabric. It's like, if you believe all the hype of a marketing person on a third party tool, and you just go, yeah, we're in, and then all of a sudden you hit a use case that is particular to your business or your setup, that just flies in the face of working with that.
Mm.
And I think that's what you need to do when you're looking at Fabric, especially if you're coming from the independent services.
I like that.
What are the key types of services that you're running? Like, what are your processes? Like, do you need to run every single process through Fabric? No. If you have 100 ADF pipes, and they're all doing, very similar things, what are the examples of, like, okay, we have a pipeline that does this, and this is the security, and these are the, tokens or service principals, or whatever the setup is that your business like wants in place, or if it was just a choice, and you take those and you kind of have to run them through Fabric. So if Fabric's not available to you, first get it available, but you have to push your production processes through it to understand whether or not all the features you need for your business are there, right? And that's just like base one, because if they're all there and it's working as you would expect, yay, right? Like, fly on. Fabric's GA. It's ready for you to go put your production workloads against. Are you going to run into potential blockers because a certain feature or a certain user type isn't supported yet? It depends on how you're implementing things kind of question. So I think that's where, check out the release plan and the blog kind of thing, staying engaged in those two links, which we will put, is important in that lens, because you have to do the due diligence to like validate that all those particular features are there.
Interesting. I like how you tie this, Seth, to key services that you're doing today, and do you want to migrate them over into Fabric? I think that's a really good point, because I was thinking about workloads that I currently do, and a lot of my workloads that I currently do today, loading from APIs, loading from structured data sources, anything that has tables in it, basically. That's a lot of what I do. A lot of what I do is move that data over into Fabric. So Fabric has made a lot of that easy for me to turn on those services and build inside the Unity, the unified experience that is Fabric.
So
I see what you almost did there.
Oh, almost did that there.
I think for a lot of organizations, then I think I'll kind of start with, is Fabric ready to migrate everything, especially a larger organization? Because I think looking at what are you obviously most critical, or what are you using that's most critical that you cannot allow to fail? Could Fabric work with pipelines, and could it work with Data Factory? Sure. But I would be in the position to be like, we have to at least start testing this. I'm sure there's some workloads, there's some projects we can do that we can do in parallel with everything that we already have going on mission critical in Azure Data Factory and blob storage. But there's enough data and there's enough tasks to go around. It's like, hey, let's just get our feet wet. I don't think the smartest idea would be to go through and say, hey, we're going to migrate everything all at once, basically, right? Like we're going to basically copy paste everything we're doing in Azure Data Factory. And we're going to move everything to Fabric. I don't think that would make sense at all, regardless.
I mean,
I don't know.
It does. Well, what do you mean by that, Mike?
Well, I think it depends, right? So if you're doing very standard things inside ADF, right? So one of the things, so I will say, I was making a little list on the side. I was like, what are some of the challenges that I currently see inside Fabric today, right? So it's like, okay, what are some of the challenges? Some of the challenges are, there's some challenges between integrations between different tools, right? I can make a pipeline, I can make a parameter, but the parameter said pipeline doesn't go into a data flow. So there's not an easy button to do that. Now I've seen Alex Powers do a great job of like explaining, hey, you can take data and write it down to a SQL endpoint, and then you can look up that data in the data flow, and then you can pass parameters that way. So there is this ability to be able to move data between a pipeline and a data flow. It's just not very seamless, and it's not very easy.
Right.
I was like, it should be as easy as going to a notebook, right? I can go from a pipeline to a notebook really easy. The parameters just work. Some of the CI/CD integration stories, not quite there yet. Like again, one of the struggles I was just doing, we built a whole bunch of data flows in a client, and now we want to migrate those data flows from dev to test. You can't migrate them. They're not available in the deployment pipelines. You can't do it. So there's other things that are like, their stories are not quite there yet. I know they're working on them, but they're not quite there yet. To your point, Tommy, around the ADF stuff, right? Then I look at like what is actually being done well, and I would say like, you get a lot of one of the things that are very easy to do is you can turn on a lot of services very quickly, and you can turn them off when you need to. It's very easy to get to pipelines. It's very easy to get a lakehouse, which is equivalent to blob storage. You can use the Kusto engine or the KQL databases. You can have streaming with event hubs, right? Another thing that I really like about the system is shortcuts. You can have data that lives other places and shortcut the data into your lakehouse to work with it. So I feel like there's a lot of like really good advantages. And, would I migrate all my ADF workloads? It depends on what you do in them. If you're running a whole bunch of SSIS procedures inside your Data Factory workloads, I would not. I would leave them where they are. But if you're just doing, connect to APIs and copy data down, or you're doing table loads of information into some lakehouse or some table structure, like I think I would migrate those. So I think the challenge for users becomes, what kind of workloads do you have, and how do you identify if those workloads fit inside Fabric and are an easy method to migrate to? We know this because I think we kind of experiment with this, but there's no really documentation or blog that I've seen that says, okay, if you're doing this kind of process, it's frictionless. If you're doing this process, it's a little bit more tricky. If you're doing this process, it's hard, right? So there needs to be like these different processes that we're kind of doing in our business. To your point, Seth, right? It's more important to understand, what are you doing? How are you transforming data? And what are you trying to do with it? Then you can align, okay, what processes do I care about? And then you should go produce some tests in Fabric that can hopefully mimic or mirror those same processes. And then you have to, as a business, that they evaluate, does this work for me? Is this good? Does that make sense what I'm saying there? Am I way off?
It does. And I think in terms of like building out the processes, the gotchas are not in, hey, we're just gonna do it. It's in not validating that the processes you're converting will work. the way you expect them to, right? It's the gotchas all the time that you didn't validate or test prior to like trying to launch into it. I guess this leads me to like another thought though, related to, while the technical implementation doesn't need to be yes, no, do you need to get full buy-in, yes, no, before you go down this route? Right? Because if I have all these independent services, and I think somebody called it out, where Fabric is, there's this fantastic story of like consolidating and bringing all of this data together in one lake. We have access to it, mirroring, connecting to all this data, et cetera. But how does that work in the scenario where you're basically creating a hybrid environment until you're fully cut over?
Yes. That also potentially adds more friction.
Well, and that's where I'm like, like, does this need to be a signed off thing, in that like this is the direction we're going to go because of these features, the capabilities, and the long like road, before you kind of go down this path of like, okay, well now I'm using Fabric for all these workloads, but not these. Because and the reason that thought came to mind was kind of because I was going down the R&D path, or net new, like you could start building in net new.
Correct.
But that's where, like, what do you guys think? Like, I have this platform I'm going to implement, and it is the same services, but it's not. It's the same data
services. This is where I think, to your point, Seth, on this is where I get a little bit dodgy around my answer, because an ADF pipeline has been very mature. It's been developed over many, many years and has been building. There is now new features showing up in the Fabric pipelines that are different. Like, you can't send a message to Teams. You can't send a message to Outlook inside the ADF experience, which I really like. That feature doesn't exist in ADF. So in one hand, I think about, it's really exciting to have all these new tools building things that I can use and consume. So you have to really, the answer, I'm going to say that it's a bad answer, but it's really going to depend on what you're doing inside that workload. And I do think that there's ability to like maintain both of them.
But that's what I'm saying. It's not workload based. Then I think what this does is it elevates it to the other level, where I think, does it behoove you? You have to have enough value in the new features and capabilities of Fabric to convince leadership that that's the path that's best for the organization to go down. Because once you open that door, like, you're going, right? Like, you're not gonna want multiple different data solutions on the back end.
Correct.
Once you go into Fabric, like that's it.
You want to do everything, right? I mean, if you're jumping in, you want to jump in with both. I feel like if you want to jump in, you should be able to jump in with both feet and go at it. I think there's another aspect of this that I want to. What is the motivating factor for organizations to commit people, time, resources to migrating things? And I see what you're saying, Seth, about the feature differences and the ease of building things. But I also think there's a pricing aspect to this as well. I think organizations,
you're poking there, aren't you?
I'm going to poke on that one. I think there's a pricing aspect of this as well. Well, again, think about it, right? Where, if you can save my team time with not having to build all this extra stuff, and the system now is just easier to work with, well, that saves me money in general, right? I don't have to spin up stuff. I don't have to get all this extra headache. It's all contained in one pricing space. Like, there's some headache of management that just disappears. And then, make it, like, for example, the Spark engine. I'm going to pick on that one for a bit. I really would like it to be very competitive with what I'm doing with Databricks. So you're competing, like, you are building new things, but yes, you've basically stretched yourself into a new area of competitors. Well, Power BI started with competing with Tableau and Click and ThoughtSpot and other programs. What's happening now is you've extended Fabric and have all these other tools that now compete with different tools now. So now you're competing Fabric against Databricks and Snowflake, and all these other competitors are now. Yes, we play together. We can read Iceberg. Yes, we can read from Databricks and Unity Catalog, all these other things. But we're playing in the same space now. So organizations have to figure out: do I stay in Databricks, or does this make sense for me to move over to Fabric? Can I get more done in Fabric, at a better cost than I can with Databricks? I don't know. So this is where I think this is also going to be consideration for organizations, is where's the best use of my money and time?
So I think a big part here is, to your point, Seth, he said him and his boss are chomping at the bits. From a buy-in point of view, I think if Chris wanted to start today, just to start testing, it sounds like his boss is all in. Sounds like they haven't done really anything. They haven't even enabled yet. So they haven't really even tried a test pipeline. So I think
I would start doing that for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's a big thing. Like I'll go back briefly. I would not take any existing major workflows that I have, especially if I deem the mission critical, and immediately start on that, trying to copy that into Fabric. I think turning it on, again, if there's a new project or there's always something that you can just begin to just get one used to the interface, used to where all the products are, see if, in a sense, create some stress tests. My dad would be very proud as an engineer, just to make sure, kind of thing. But I think there's, for a lot of people, even though the products are more or less the same, they brought it all in from Synapse, they brought it all in from Data Factory. Again, to your point, there are some small components that either added or subtracted in Fabric. So just stress test what you normally do. Test something else.
I'm going to interrupt.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think we're talking about some small little features. We're talking hard blockers for people's implementations. And sometimes there are. And like, you can't, to Mike's point earlier, are there a bunch of things that you can work around in Fabric? Yes. Right. If you're going early in a newly GA'd product, you got to be comfortable with working around like something. But Tommy, if you don't support service principals, or you don't support managed keys, or something that's a core implemented thing within your organization, like there's no workaround for that. So like, that's what I want to be. And I'm not saying like all those features are not available. It's just some are, some aren't, right? And like, you can't work around core pieces of security or implementation in the way that your organizations have set stuff up. So I think we still are in the realm where there are some hard blockers, and that's why I, recommending that like you go down this path of validation and testing is paramount when we're on the project, like the implementation level.
Yeah, and I was looking at the roadmap. Service principles are in the pipeline for Fabric. But to your point, I know for a lot of organizations, that's more or less the showstopper right there.
So, I mean, I think a lot of these are right now. I've been very clear about, like, when we started Fabric, I was like, it's going to come out a little bit rough. It's going to come out a little bit, bumpy. It's going to get better though. And I do feel like we're at a point right now where things have gotten a lot better. I'm already moving some substantial workloads, some solutions that I'm building for customers. I'm moving them directly into Fabric, and that's how we start.
Yeah.
We start with Fabric and we build everything that we need there, because we know, so let's go back to the question, right? Here we're talking about, evaluating Fabric or not. Let's go back to the question, right? Chris asks, we have not enabled it in our tenant yet. Should we start playing with some things? Yes, you should. Take inventory of what are some of your more painful workloads or processes that you're doing today, and think, okay, what is the best strategic value add? How can I get data from ADLS and ADF into Fabric and get it into Power BI semantic models as quickly as possible? Is there any major savings that are doing that processing? And I would argue, right, this makes a lot of sense. If again, this to me, this is a very known quantity. Using a pipeline, collecting some data, putting it down in the lakehouse, and then using a semantic model or lakehouse to get that data into Power BI, that's a really good workload. I would right away say, do it. Like, just go experiment with it, because the pipelines can go ahead and build tables, delta tables for you immediately out of the pipeline. It's a lot more challenging to build a delta table in ADF and then go consume that directly in Power BI. There's a couple more steps. So I really there's a couple things in here that I really enjoy. And one of the real deep integrations I enjoy right now is how easy it is to make tables in Lakehouse, and how quickly it is to get them into Fabric semantic models and ultimately start building reports on top of them. That to me seems like a very good experience. Can I do a full CI/CD pipeline on that thing yet? I'm not sure yet. Like that. So that's where I'm like, it's a little bit untested yet. can you build one environment of that? Yes, no problem. But if you're going to build dev, test, prod, and move it all through pipelines, it will probably work in deployment pipelines as long as you're not using data flows. So one thing I'm going to kind of harp on here a little bit from the Microsoft side, and I know they're working on it, so I got to give them credit. They're making progress. It's just not baked for me enough right yet. When I look at people showing up to, it's just data flows, Gen 2. Like it's just, there's a couple really key features that I need to have like turned on and ready to go. I think incremental refresh is one that I really need inside data flows, and I need it to work with a lakehouse. I mean, that just feels like something that needs to be a very solid, I got to have it. I do a lot of incremental refresh on other stuff. I think it needs to be there. Data flows should definitely be able to handle a parameter from a pipeline. I do a lot of pipelines, and we build a lot of parameters. So if I'm giving Chris some advice here, I'd say, Chris, if you are comfortable using, pipelines and notebooks and semantic models, it's really ready to go. There's a lot of solid pieces in Fabric that are just dialed. If you're talking about data flows Gen 2 and adding that into the mix, which where I think a lot of our business users are coming from, there's just a couple more rough friction points that I'm not ready to fully dive into it yet. So like, I love data flows. It's an awesome tool. It's so good, but we're just on the cusp of like making it great because it can't quite integrate what I need it to do with pipelines. And it doesn't work with CI/CD either. So I can't take a data flow and move it between dev, test, and prod inside the pipelines. So these are like, I like data flows. It's just not quite there yet. And I think they're working on it. But to me, as long as your workflows include most of the Fabric elements aside from data flows, I'd really try out a really strong proof of concept. I think that's worth your time.
Yeah.
So
I think
I guess I'm curious then if we're all pretty clear that, hey, there's a lot of features that are, some of them are deal breakers. The service principles is actually a really good one. Then how far does even not just Chris and his team, but Mike, you said you're doing some workloads right now in Fabric. And again, that works. Are you doing that for clients or are you doing that just for yourself?
I'm doing it for clients. So we have production workloads that we're building out for clients, but it's using very specific things. It's using pipelines, it's using notebooks, and then we're getting right into semantic models. So like the things that we're building are using what I think are some of the strongest components of Fabric at this point. We're staying kind of clear away from data flows because I've worked with clients and we're trying to migrate things with data flows. It's a lot more painful. It doesn't quite have the simple experience. So if you think about the challenge, I mean, it's difficult to move things between environments, especially in a data flow, because a data flow points potentially at a lakehouse. It picks up files from that lakehouse and it moves it and writes it down somewhere else. You think about the two connection strings, we have a source and a destination. Those things need to be parameterized and be able to move them between different environments. So I can't assume that every environment has the exact same database on the back end. I can't assume every environment has the exact same name for the lakehouse. So there's all these like little tiny parameters that you need to inject throughout pipelines or processes to then build these different environments. So that to me, it's just harder to work with that. And the fact that I can't get a data flow into a Git integration, it doesn't check into DevOps. I can't physically change the code and like make like, okay, I'm going to change this line of text and then release it in this new thing or rebind it or whatever. There's just nothing. There's no tooling out there to support it today. So it's just a bit more friction for me. So for me personally, I'm steering clear of that. But everything else, pipelines, notebooks, I can very easily move those things through. Those seem to be much easier to move through.
I think, and I am coming up with these as a hot take, based on Tommy's reactions in both directions, right?
Yeah.
I think it's important for folks in this conversation to take into totality all of the aspects and not gravitate towards product paralysis, right? Like new product, oh my gosh, I'm afraid it's not going to handle all my workloads. It's not fully baked. What do I do? We're not going to turn it on. We're not going to do anything until it hits some level of comfort. And then on the opposite spectrum, you have like feature fear, which is what Tommy was just like, oh my gosh, like it doesn't support SPNs. And it's like, well, do you guys use those in your organization? No. Okay, well then why does it matter, right?
Mhm.
Like it shouldn't. So as you're looking to integrate or leverage this new product, don't get hung up on features that aren't relevant to you. Just because it's not supported or it's like this one security thing that is relevant to 10% of workloads that's not in there, it it doesn't matter in the context of what you should be caring about, which is, does this new product offer better better processes, better features, better capabilities than my existing solution, right? And that takes diligence, right? So in some cases, like Mike, you're expressing, if it's a newer organization that doesn't have a ton of these baked in processes, we're not talking about integrations. We're not talking about like migrating from one platform or service into this.
Yeah.
It's net new.
That's net new. Agree.
What are other options though for, so the net new is always the easiest answer, right?
Correct.
It's always going to be, yeah, let's jump into Fabric. It's going to be where Microsoft invests all their time and resources and money and new features, etc. Makes total sense. I think where Chris comes from, which is the vast majority of other organizations, and then it scales up, is, well, we already have solutions.
When do I cut
There's
over?
there's a driver for us to want to get onto Fabric. It's important for you, the Fabric fans.
Yep.
Oh man, I'm full of them today. Fabric fans.
You are.
To be able to outline what are all the features that you care about. What are the advancements in this that are going to simplify your workload? Like Mike you just rambled through like 2 or 3 different use cases. They're so much more simple to get from like raw data to reporting in this ecosystem without tons of data movement across like all of this and that, blah, blah, blah. Outline those features, right? That's what's really important. And I think R&D for those types of organizations, right? Like net new things. Okay, I want to vet like this thing. It's an internal workload completely. Like, great. This is a candidate for us to build in Fabric. And then if like it's either that and it's got similarities to an existing workload, so you can do price comparison.
Yes.
Or if you're like considering Fabric as the next gen thing you want to move into, then just build the same workloads, right?
Yes.
Because this kind of sticks in. I'll reserve my last point because I'm talking already a little bit, but like cost stuff is important, especially around the platforms that we have. And if you've gone through the due diligence and actually understand your costs in Azure,
yep,
you're terrified of like, okay, this is all new. What is this going to do for my budget, my long-term plan? How is this like, it's not the costs necessarily up front. It's okay, I'm going to incur more costs to validate, test, plan on top of my existing. So I need a budget for that.
Yep.
And then it's not necessarily the price of capacity. It's the usage and performance and what do I need to increase, burst or like increase cost. Like how does my existing budget align to that net new budget? And that's where I think that's where you have to take some of your heavy workloads in certain areas and figure out like, okay, what is that going to cost in this net new ecosystem? The balance there though is if your front end solution costs money in terms of refreshing data, like there's potential huge cost savings if you're able to directly plug into the Delta tables and not have to refresh your data, right? So you're
the
like,
upload or the import method of
it's not in this discussion or in this decision making. Like I think there's a whole lot of components you have to look at holistically because Fabric brings them all together, right? So they're not just independent workloads anymore or independent services. It's the whole combination of things that you have to say, like, be cognizant of, one, but two, align so that as you're doing that comparison, you would give the pluses and or minuses, and hopefully it's all plus, but it's going to be part of the conversation eventually, right? Like you're not just going to, rarely are you going to get carte blanche to just be like, yeah, go just do it. Push on to a new system. What's that going to cost? We don't know.
Just do it.
Just do it. So,
oh man, there's so many good points you made here.
I know.
I got like 1,000. I'm literally writing copious notes here on my sides. I want to reinforce some points and I want to push you on some others. This is really good. Sorry, Tommy, go ahead. You're going to jump in.
No, I think that's a conversation for another day because you are incorporating the costs in here too. And I think we're telling all the features and the settings and getting your stuff. But yeah, the cost is such a huge part of this too. And kind of like what kind of budget are you creating, especially if you are going to be testing things out? No, I think from a consideration point of view, I'm just going to go back to a point though. More unlikely than not, organizations are going to adopt Fabric. And it's probably going to, I think with really what you see on the roadmap to this year, they're really going to answer or curtail, I think, a lot of everyone's biggest, like, because it doesn't have this, it's a non-starter from security, APIs, and just features. I know as we get to near the tail end here of a conversation, because we could continue to expand. I think for me, I'm just going to go back to, it doesn't hurt too much to start a Fabric trial still being offered right now.
Low barrier, like low cost, low barrier to entry. Correct. I agree with that one a lot.
Right. So you can get a trial. You don't even have to spend a dime today if you wanted to try it.
Yep.
So I don't think it's, I wonder why. Maybe you guys can answer this too. For Chris and his boss, we're like, they haven't even turned it on. They're really worried because it doesn't have all the features, but they haven't even tested it out, at least for just them, not necessarily for the organization. I wonder where that hesitation comes from, more than just cost, especially if the cost is free.
Well, I would recommend. So when you say the free trial, I think there's some words of wisdom that I would kind of maybe give to people of trying to like, we're just trying to figure it out. We're just starting it. I would imagine most people who listen to the podcast are probably very Power BI centric, and maybe they're on that threshold of like, should we start playing with Fabric? One thing I would just note is when you turn on the trial method, you're getting like, I think it's a 30-day. I'm not sure if it's 60 or 30. I don't know exactly if it changes because I have already had the trial for a while. So it may be a 60-day trial. I'm not sure. Whenever you have that trial, when you're ready to commit to it, do commit as an organization some substantial time to let people build in it. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to take an opportunity like that and say, I'm going to take the 30-day trial and not build anything until day 15, right? So, okay, Alex is confirming it is a 60-day trial. So if you have a 60-day trial, right, get started, and even potentially do some, what kind of workloads do you have that you could start mirroring over this one? And to your point, Seth, earlier, right, there is this whole, I'm going to spend some effort testing and validating and planning until I need to build some things. So when you're ready, do a little bit of research, find some processes you think either are net new or things you want to build that are a good candidate there. And this is actually, I think, a good an area. Talk to some other experts in your business. Go, talk to some consultants. Go to a user group. Ask some user group people what workloads are they doing that they're finding. I'm trying to, like, in this conversation here, I'm also trying to give you some workloads that I'm finding that are very useful inside Fabric that I enjoy working with, right? Pipeline to notebook to semantic model. Like if you think that's something you want to build, I'd really highly recommend testing that out inside Fabric. But don't wait till the end, right? Get a plan, get what you're going to do, carve out some substantial time. And I know you're doing your day job, so you can't spend every day in it, but try to carve out some time earlier on in the process so you can actually start finding that it's useful earlier on and using building those new workloads or workflows inside that experience. And
so Mike, what do you do if you're an organization where you had somebody who got really, really excited and turned on your trial and then you weren't ready to do all that?
Well, it's per user, right? I mean, it's kind of a per user basis, right? So yeah, that happens. Try and work with the user.
Try for more trials.
Trying to find a user that has not gotten a trial yet and start one. I mean, there are also some settings in the admin portal you have to turn on, right? So there definitely is even there as well. I would recommend, if you're going to go down this trial route, don't open up Fabric for everyone in the organization because you don't know what you're going to get, and stuff could get a little bit hairy to manage after the fact. So I would recommend, one is making sure that you go into the admin portal and you make a security group around the users that are going to be testing Fabric. put them in that security group and then add the security group. Hey, we're going to let users make Fabric elements in this group. And even still, you need a limited user group of who can actually try the trial of the Fabric SKU as well. So when you're logged at powerbi.com, there's a try Fabric now button. Well, that only shows up to certain people when you have them in the right security group, in the right setting and admin portal. So those two things have to be on regardless, but I would not open Fabric up wide to your entire organization for trials. I would narrow it down to a very small group of people to go experiment and try things with.
And maybe that's the key to your question, Tommy, is it sounds like Chris and his manager are in a business unit or in a BI team with handcuffs, right? Where they don't have access to turn or toggle these admin controls. So maybe the approach there is to approach those with the keys to the castle with this idea of, hey, like you guys can enable this just for us, right? So create your security group, enable this so that we can start playing around and it's not going to do anything organization wide.
Alex Powers brings up another part here. He's been really chatting up here. I guess we struck a chord here with Alex a little bit, but Alex says, try to identify in your realm or whatever you're building here, find areas where there is a high value to time, right? It's a little bit of time, but you can get high amounts of value out of it. So if there are any kind of proof of concepts where you can go around and find there's something that we struggle with and it's structured data and I could probably get this done quickly. And, those are good opportunities to try things out and do a high time to value. And I think I want to go back here just briefly, Seth. I really loved your cost conversation. And I think there's a couple things that I like to think about when I'm thinking about cost or time. One is the time to develop it, meaning is it easy to integrate the tools together? So that saves me time and money eventually in the long run. And then there's this performance side of this thing, right? Can I spend the same amount of money but get more out of the tool? And I think there is opportunity here, depending on what tools you're using. There is an opportunity to start centralizing your data development, your data engineering, and your reporting, and like bring it all under one house. And I think there's going to be a really good opportunity to optimize and build better stuff inside the context of Fabric. And I'm really encouraged by the speed in which features have been developed from Fabric in general. I really like that part of it. The fact that it goes so quickly, and we've been seeing so many new features come out, and the fact that we're overwhelmed in the blogs of all the new stuff is encouraging to me. Now, granted, some of those things that are being developed are not what I love. I'm not in real-time streaming analytics at this point. That seems where a lot of the features are coming out right now. But everything else is getting more robust as we go. And so I really like the fact that I'm building in a tool in an area where Microsoft is investing. And so I like aligning my direction of my company to the direction of where Microsoft's going, where they're spending the time. I want to build in tools where there's lots of blog releases and posts and features being updated, because that feels more future-proof than trying to use, for example, SSIS. I don't see a lot of new features or blogs coming out from SSIS these days.
Fact.
You can fact check me on that one.
I think level of effort kind of pushes towards another, I think, important thing to do that businesses should do before diving or like fully into Fabric testing, right? Is understand what your baselines are, right? Like you have to understand, like, how long do my current processes take? How much do my current processes cost me? Because in order to convey that, hey, these things are faster to develop or they run just as performant as our existing processes, you got to understand where you are before where you're going, right?
Yeah.
And the offset in there is hopefully that story is better in Fabric, because you're going to then say, hey, we want to get to this better state and we want to get to all of these great things, but we're also going to incur a cost in getting there, because development is going to slow down until it speeds up, right? We're gonna have tech debt kind of things of migrating, moving things around and resetting processes and doing all this stuff in Fabric. So that the selling point has to be, here are all the better things for us in the organization.
Strategically, the direction we want to go.
Correct.
Yeah, I agree.
Before you can just be like, yeah, we're doing it. So I think I think it's very easy to think about this in the technical realms of like, ooh, new technology, like let's get on the thing and new tech and it's fun and let's learn. But like, understand you're in the context of a business, right? So we're here to make money, and technically, business intelligence teams should be driving on two different fronts, right? One is efficiencies, and the other is driving revenue, right? With insights. So if Fabric offers these things and you can prove it out, that's all you got to do, right? Like, so I absolutely look for use cases, look for areas of opportunity where Fabric does streamline a lot of, these end-to-end data, needs that organizations have, because they don't care about the nuance. They care about, like, at the end of the day, do you have an understanding of, like, we're going to net save X thousand of dollars per month moving from this process into Fabric, and we're going to get, have all of this data in the same location. So the next time you request things, level of effort to bring it, forward is a lot lower, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So I think it's just weighing a lot of different factors, because you're talking about many different types of services doing many different types of data activities, and it's part of that whole ecosystem. So you can't just don't carte blanche make big sweeping assumptions or you know decisions in either direction. It requires a little bit of due diligence in your existing stuff, compare it, net new things to test out and see if Fabric's a good fit for you right now, or something you revisit in 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. Enterprise AR makes a really good point here. And he's saying, he's kind of speaking to his organization a little bit. He goes, this is a kind of a catch-22. I work for a conglomerate with subsidiaries where Fabric would be awesome, but the organization, even IT, has a silo on top of silo on top of silos. And I think I'm maybe taking this with a bit of a rose lens glasses here, slightly, just because, yes, I think the larger the company that you are, I think there's a lot of political challenge or headwinds that come along with that potentially at those larger companies. And there's also a lot of other investment. There's potentially a very strong IT organization that has already built a lot of infrastructure a certain way, and it works for them because you had to build things to make the business run. So I'm not saying, tear all that down and start over again. It's probably going to be more challenging to get that buy-in and to start that migration. And so I think for larger organizations, starting strategic net new processes or net new projects might make a lot more sense there, as opposed to, okay, the whole organization now has to commit to lots of money and extensive amounts of time to move everything over. I don't think you make the decision at this point. I think it's a lot of just, where you're starting to build more workloads there. And I think as you find the value from the tool, you continue to build more workloads and it kind of snowballs from there. At least that's how I see it working. So I think our larger organizations have a lot more political headwinds than I think medium to smaller organizations. They're a bit more nimble and can move quicker through this, I believe.
Sure.
Just want to kind of point it out. I thought that was a great point around, that your business politics does play a factor in how quickly you can kind of shift here or not shift. I don't want to be naive and say, oh yeah, it's just easy, just turn it on and go. Like there is probably a lot of other challenges in the business that are doing things, and potentially.
Yeah, but at the same time, I think going back to your same argument, right?
Yeah.
Like, if even in those challenging environments, if you can lead with, great, yeah, totally understand the complexity. What we'd like to do is prove out these things to the business.
Yes.
You can do that in a limited fashion by just enabling, Fabric trials for these people. And that would allow us to go either, showcase what we can do versus what we can't, right?
Yes.
Or prove out that there is a bunch of value here for the entire organization to go after. And hopefully they're amenable to that. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Otherwise you get the hard no.
I will say, in the last 6 months of development, I'm very much more excited than I was when it started at GA, honestly. I feel like a lot of features are being made. I feel like the product teams are listening to what needs to be developed. So in my final thoughts here, like talking back to Chris specifically, Chris, I think you're in the right path. I think you're heading the right direction. I think finding that little proof of concept and getting your head around what is capable in Fabric and how it meets your business's needs, I think it's a great place to start. I would also kind of echo, like, in the last 6 months, I've seen Fabric make some really strong strides, really improvements to where I think the tool needs to go to make my world easier. And so I'm encouraged to see the next 6 months of development, how much more progress we can make in another 6 months towards this as well. And I think that's just going to, again, continually close the gaps and make it more competitive with other tools in the market. It's going to be more of my central place to go. I'm enjoying, just in general, I'm enjoying the experience of developing in Fabric. I really am. I really like notebooks. I really like pipelines. There's a lot of things that just work well together now that really make it an enjoyable engineering and building experience for Power BI things. So I'm encouraged. I like where it's going. I'm going to continue to use it. I'm going to continue to push harder into it because I think this is really a good direction Microsoft's going. Tommy, any final words for you?
No, I think that the biggest thing is right now take a look at the roadmap, take a look at the timelines that Microsoft says, especially for things that you think are deal breakers right now. But just start testing, even if it's something that may not ever go to production. Enable a Fabric free trial for over a month. Just at least get started in the workflow and how it works, and then you can put together your assessment and your judgment on the projects that you're doing. But because Microsoft is allowing us to, again, really play in the sandbox without really having to utilize our most critical workloads and our most critical projects, it's an easy win just to get it started.
Yeah, I think ultimately you win in engaging. So Fabric's the future of Microsoft products, right? It behooves you to get in at some point. It just depends on like how you get there. Because like Power BI, what you see is a mass amount of investment in not tabular models themselves, right? AAS, right? You saw the mass investment in Power BI, which is where we were leveraging that technology. In the same way, Fabric brings all these things together. You're seeing a massive push and support for all of these things together. The ultimate story is much better across the board. So I think it's just a matter of when and how. And so this is a good question and a good conversation. But as we're in this state where it's not like there isn't 100% feature parity. Yep. Okay. So you got to take it in steps. And I think ultimately looking at a key area of your business that you think Fabric would win in is a great starting point to get buy-in for you to start testing on it and do things that you can build a business case for, right? Ultimately, what you're trying to do is point out that there's solutions in Fabric that are much better for the business, whether that's time savings. Alex Powers pointed out 2 great scenarios where like taking 3 to 6 month projects and doing them in a day, man, oh my gosh, like that's a massive use case, right? Like if you ever ran into a case where it's like, hey, that project you're doing over there, what's their timeline on that? And then building it in a couple days, like I think you'd win, right? Like I think Fabric would win there.
Yeah.
So like looking for opportunities like that, as opposed to just saying like, I have these pipelines and I want to move them. It like is more friction if you don't have the support that you need. But either way, I think long term, you just figure out where you can plug in and how, and ultimately we're all on the same road to Fabric together, I think.
Agree. All right, excellent.
Road to Fabric.
So great conversation. Good question from the mailbag. Thank you very much for doing the mailbag. Tommy will give you more information. If you have a question that you'd like us to review or go through, I think we're actually handling these questions. These feel like very real world challenge type questions. So I love the mailbag questions. They're super good. So thank you very much. We really appreciate your ears today. We know you have a million podcasts you can listen to. There's a ton of things out there. So we really do appreciate you taking time to listen with us. We really appreciate it. So thank you so much for engaging. Chat has been wonderful yet again. Thank you so much in chat for the great conversation and just challenging this. Like these are challenging things to think through. We need to bounce these ideas off each other, figure out what works well for us as a team and other teams, and what works for one company may not work for all companies. That's okay. So with that, if you like this conversation, if you're finding value from this, please let somebody else know, either on social media or at work. Just let them know you found the Explicit Measures podcast and you're finding some value from it. Maybe somebody else can listen to it while they go on their run or their walk, or just when you're tired of listening to your boss, you just put it on and ignore them for a bit. Maybe that'll help you. Don't do that. Don't ignore your boss. That's not a good recommendation. So with that, where else, Tommy, can you find the podcast?
You can find the podcast on all of our social media platforms. How do I not memorize this by now? Oh my gosh. You can find us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. Make sure to subscribe and leave a rating. It helps us out a ton. Do you have a question, an idea, or a topic that you want us to talk about in a future episode? Head over to powerbai.tips/podcast. Leave your name and a great question. Finally, join us live every Tuesday and Thursday, 7:30 a.m. Central. And make sure to follow us on all of Power BI Tips social media channels.
Awesome. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.